It's time for the JMRA Football Podcast, a podcast for the fans by a fan. Yeah! Here's your host, Derek Jones.
It's time for another edition of the JMRA Football Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Jones, here with you to talk all things National Football League as we get you set for Week 6. They're stacking up, folks. We've got tons of stuff to cover. We're going to look back at Week 5 and take a teeny tiny sneak peek at what's to come here in Week 6 with a very, meh slate. Interesting set of games, but we'll get into it. But first, you can check us out on the social medias, as it were. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. All by searching Joe Montana's Right Arm. And you can hit us up on the blog and catch the Sunday Nickel at joemontanasrightarm.com. Well, it was a very intriguing Week 5 of action because we really saw, I think, one of the best games of the season, at least on paper, develop into one of the biggest routes of the season. And that, of course, Cowboys and 49ers. The 49ers just absolutely laying the Cowboys to waste in significant fashion. 42-10 win for the 49ers. And that's where we will start with our takeaways from Week 5. Number 1, 49ers, best team in football. I don't want to hear about the Eagles. 49ers, best team in football. The Eagles have kind of gotten by. You know, they've had control of most of these games, but they've gotten by on a weekly basis. And I know a win's a win. That's the motto around these parts in the Philadelphia area. A win's a win. But I really believe if you're one of the teams that is a Super Bowl contender, a win is not a win. When you look at the teams that have been winning Super Bowls over the last really decade or so, by and large, it's been one of the teams who's been a 1 or a 2 seed. You know, Tampa won in the COVID year as a 4 seed. But, you know, you look at a lot of these teams, they're winning comfortably in the regular season. And I think that's the thing. And the Eagles are hitting a tough part of their schedule. Will they kind of fall by the wayside during that tough part of the schedule? I don't think so. I think the Chiefs Super Bowl kind of proved that they at least belong, at minimum, in the discussion with the elite teams. Miami is a little compromised now, as we'll get into, but a very, very interesting situation with the Eagles and 49ers because on December 3rd, the Eagles will play the 49ers in Philadelphia. And I got to say, I mean, to me, it's all about health with the 49ers and keeping Christian McCaffrey healthy. If he's healthy, they're going to be a very tough out. Brandon Ayuk is having a career year so far, and Brock Purdy. It's time to have some serious discussions about whether Brock Purdy deserves some MVP looks. And that is, to me, I think, one of the more intriguing discussions this year because Purdy is not as flashy as some of the other MVP candidates. Is not as flashy as one of his own teammates in McCaffrey. But he has just been lights out this season, coming back from that UCL injury suffered in the NFC Championship game back in January against the Eagles. He threw for 252 yards, 4 touchdowns on Sunday in the win against the Dallas Cowboys. So the 49ers, according to Aaron Schatz and his DVOA metric, they are the best team of really this decade in DVOA through the first 5 games, and then how it stacks up since 1981. On the list, they are 7th. They are the 7th best team ever in DVOA through 5 games. The 91 Washington Commanders / Redskins at the time are at the top of that list. That Washington team was full of veterans. It wasn't a young team, but they were just annihilating teams on a weekly basis through ultimately what would be a Super Bowl win for them. But the 49ers, they have played so well to start out the year. We'll see as the competition gets tweaked a little bit, gets turned up a little bit. We'll see how they respond. They've got an interesting game on Sunday at Cleveland. It looks like Deshaun Watson may not play. which is going to be interesting. But if he does not play, that really puts a lot of pressure on that Cleveland defense, which has been very good so far to start out the year. So the 49ers at the top of the food chain in the NFL right now. Number 2, the NFL dealt the Bills a bad hand. And I think if you're the NFL, right, you're measuring kind of, okay, we want to have marquee games overseas, but to me, it can't be this. They're going to have 2 games coming up this year. Well, they've already had one of them that ultimately could decide a bye, home field, seeding, and they're being played overseas in a very uneven situation. The Jaguars basically were doing the Barry Manilow residency out in London, and they were there for 2 weeks. The Bills did not get into town until, I believe, Friday. So that gives you 3. You can't treat that like you're going to the West Coast. That is a very difficult trip. Now, look, I hate when people equate injuries to professional athletes, but I've been to London twice in the last 6 years. I went to London last November. Honestly, that's one of the reasons why the podcast stopped, because I had to go to London for about a week, and it was just, I got sick after. It was a whole thing. But the thing about that is it is a long time for you to get acclimated physically. It's not something you do in a day. And they tried to basically do it in 2 days. I'm sure they got very good advice on how to get acclimated body-wise. But, man, that is a tough thing to do. So the NFL basically asked them to take on a team that's been playing in London for 2 weeks. I mean, I just don't think that was the right thing to do. The Bills, look, they got outplayed by the Jaguars. There's no question about it. The Bills did an awful job of covering Calvin Ridley. Of course, all the injuries. Now the Matt Milano injury, that's going to take some steam out of the Bills defensively, which is not great for them at all because it looks like he's going to miss the rest of the season. So that's a big negative for Buffalo. But, man, they were really dealt, I thought, a raw deal. If you're going to have these games that mean something, they should not be played overseas. And now, coming up in a few weeks, you're going to have the Dolphins and Chiefs play in Germany. That literally could be a game to determine the 1 or the 2 seed, and they're playing at 9:30 in the morning Eastern time. What are we doing? Come on, guys. Enough. Please stop. As the kids say, stop the cat. Stop it. Stop it. I understand you're trying to build the markets internationally. I get that. I don't have any problem with throwing a game over there. You can't do this. You can't make it be a game of this importance. And I know they can't figure out in advance what's going to mean what. But here's a hint. If it's a game between 2 playoff teams and one of them won the Super Bowl, don't do it. Don't put it in Germany. Put it in either Miami or Kansas City. Because now you're going to have a situation where you're going to have to see a game that could very well have some dramatic and impactful meaning come January, determined in Germany. That I just think that's not a good idea. Number 3, the Baltimore Ravens. So I say this with no disrespect intended to Lamar Jackson. I say this with no disrespect intended to John Harbaugh. We might get there, I guess. But my point is, I don't think it's ever going to happen for the Ravens. And what I mean by it is them winning the Super Bowl. I don't think it's going to happen in the Lamar Jackson era. And look, you can't overreact at them losing a divisional game. It is what it is. You know, these teams have gone to Pittsburgh a ton, and things don't work out well. You know, those kind of things can get turned sideways on you. But they were really awful on Sunday. They had the Steelers really in their back pocket for 4 quarters. And then between the drop passes, they dropped 7 of them. Andrews, Bateman, Aguilar, Flowers, all had drops. It was just a massively disappointing performance by the Ravens. And then that opens the door for really the Steelers to steal the game because Kenny Pickett found George Pickens down the sideline on a long touchdown pass, and it's 17-10 Steelers, and that's ball game. It's a terrible job by the Ravens. You've got to win games in tight quarters, and they could not do it. And I think, again, it's not that they lost to Pittsburgh. That's not even my problem. My problem is how they did it. And we talk here every year about, well, Lamar needs more help. He needs more help. How many years are you going to keep shuffling in wide receivers? Odell Beckham is finished. He's finished. He looks shot. Done. Zay Flowers, I have some hope for him. Aguilar is what he is. Bateman, I don't have much hope for him. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He got hit right in the hands with a touchdown pass on Sunday and dropped it. And I know that kind of thing happens. But for a team that is trying to win a Super Bowl with a guy who they gave a 5-year deal with $185 million guaranteed, it's not looking good. And the defense is okay. It's not peak Baltimore Ravens defense, but it's just not of the import of past Ravens teams. So I think this is going to be tough for the Ravens to get done. The good news for them is the AFC North is no good. The AFC North, as of October the 13th, is very mid. And as long as it stays that way, they've got a chance to hang around. But they've got to perform a heck of a lot better than what they have here the last handful of weeks, losing to the Colts at home and now losing to the Steelers on the road. Bad job by the Ravens. They're going to need more out of that wide receiving group, but the question is, are they going to get it? I don't think so. Number 4, we should probably take the Detroit Lions seriously now, ladies and gentlemen. And one of the, I guess, aftershock effects of the Cowboys losing to the 49ers. Now, if you hear Micah Parsons tell it, the Cowboys are still an elite team. And he has to say that, and I'm sure he believes it. But the reality of the situation is if you're ranking the top 3 teams in the NFC right now, you go 49ers 1, Eagles 2, you have to say the Lions are the 3rd best team. The Lions have a quality win on the season. Now, say what you want about the Chiefs with no Travis Kelce, it's still the Chiefs. So I would have to say, the Lions right now look like a team that is a very serious business. So, and they have a schedule coming up that is not that challenging when you take a look at it. It's a schedule that they, I think, should be able to stack some wins in. At Tampa, a little tricky. At Baltimore, a little tricky. Raiders after that, bye week. Chargers, then it goes a little soft. Bears, Packers, Saints, Bears, Broncos. Who knows what the Vikings are going to be by week 16. But that's some good eating. With 4 wins already in your back pocket, I'm looking at them maybe, you split the next 2 games. You're 5-2. The Raiders at 6. The Chargers, let's say they lose that one. You're 6-3. Bears, Packers, that's 2 wins right there at home. You're 8-3 at that point. Maybe you lose to the Saints 8-4, although I think they can win that game, but we'll give them a loss. At the Bears, 9-4. Denver at home, 10-4. At Minnesota, probably 11-4. And then, the Dallas and Minnesota games to end the year, those are winnable. And right now, if the Cowboys play the Lions tomorrow, I'm picking the Lions. So you're looking at a team in Detroit, I think, that has a chance to easily win between 10 to 12 games with that schedule. So that, and look, they have a very good offense, and as long as they keep putting points on the board, they're going to be tough to beat. So I think you have to take the Lions real seriously right now and look at them kind of in that 3 spot. And when you look at kind of how the standings could play out right now, again, could be 1, 2, 3, 49ers, Eagles, Lions. And, let's say the Lions are playing, well, they probably won't play the Cowboys in week 1 of the playoffs, but Seattle could be looking at Detroit, Seattle again. We saw that a few weeks ago. Now, oddly enough, that's the one loss for the Lions, home to Seattle. So I think that's a pretty good situation there for Detroit. If you're able to get a high seed, when was the last? They haven't had a high seed in the playoffs since '91. I mean, you're talking about one of any kind of renown. They've been a division winner here or there, but they won the division title in '93, but not the same kind of vibe that they have right now. So you've got to feel good if you're a Detroit Lions fan. But it's time to pay attention to what's going on in Detroit. And our last bit in Week 5, who are the actual contenders in the AFC? Heading into the year, we talked about the big three. We talked about Cincinnati, Buffalo, Kansas City. Those are the heaters, so to speak. But as we take a look at really how this season has played out, Kansas City's still Kansas City. They cleaned up Denver last night, just an atrocious ball game. I mean, thank goodness the Phillies were on. Ugh. So they're off and running. They're fine. Kansas City's okay. Although the receiver thing, that's got to get fixed. The receivers are, we talked about the word mid, very lackluster. So that's got to happen. Buffalo does this thing kind of not in the same way Cincinnati does. Buffalo kind of feeling their way through the first 5 games or so, and now with the injuries, we'll see where they go. Cincinnati's still a step off. No doubt about it. They're still a step off. The defense hasn't been quite as good, and the offense obviously has been off the mark up until this past weekend with Jamar Chase. So those are the things that kind of concern you with the big three. I would remove Cincinnati from that mix. And right now, really, it's the big threes, Kansas City, Miami, and Buffalo. But the trick is, one of those 2 big three is going to be a wild card. And I think that's the trick. Can Buffalo overcome these defensive injuries? Because if they can't, then hypothetically, and we've got a long way to go. But I love projecting this stuff this early on. Very easy to see. Could be looking at Kansas City 1, Miami 2, and then we'll see kind of where things evolve from there. We'll see where things evolve from there. So I think you have to feel pretty good right now if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, although the injury to Achane, I don't love that because he's been such a dynamic runner for them with that speed to the edge. They've got to get him back healthy. He's on the IR now. Basically, he's going to miss at least 4 games. So we'll see kind of how that plays out for the Dolphins. Okay, let's run through what was Week 5 in the NFL. The Bears last Thursday defeating the Commanders 40-20. We hear so much talk about Caleb Williams of USC. Both these teams need him. Both of them. Both. Washington, no disrespect to Sam Howell, but they got to figure something out, man. Washington can't go on like this. They need an elite quarterback. I don't know how they're going to find one because they're good enough not to be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. But maybe you do Drake May. I don't know. But this is not where it's at. We talked about Jaguars and Bills. Jaguars 25-20 over Buffalo. Josh Allen 359 yards. The Bills defense had no answer for Calvin Ridley, 122 yards receiving. He was wide open pretty much on every big play that the Jaguars need to move the chains. And that's a big lift for Jacksonville. They had to have that game at 2-2. Big win for them to now improve to 3-2. The Falcons, 21-19 winners over the Texans. Good morale boost here for Atlanta. We didn't mention it. They were a part of that London situation with Jacksonville as well. They went overseas, got beat by the Jags. Now they come back home and defeat the Texans on a last-second field goal by Younghoe Koo to win it by 21-19. Desmond Ridder, bounce-back performance for him, 329 yards through the air. Colts, 23, Titans, 16. So the Colts are going to be without Anthony Richardson with, it looks like, anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks with a shoulder separation. And look, I like Richardson's talent. Like, he's a very good athlete. He has to improve on his accuracy throwing the football. But I think the biggest problem is that style of play just is it's not conducive to staying healthy. I'm sorry. Just running that physical brand of football. That's why you see Jalen Hurts kind of having a weird start to the year, because I think the Eagles are trying to manage him here through an entire season, and they don't want him to get hurt because he's gotten hurt the last 2 years. So that running style just opens you up to hits, opens you up to a lot of things that you don't need to be opened up to. So the Colts now will have to turn to Gardner Minshew. And how about Jonathan Taylor? He gets the contract extension for 3 years, and then Zach Moss goes in there on Sunday and goes for 165. It happens sometimes where the backup, performs very well, and Moss has done extremely well here in the absence of Taylor. We'll see how the Colts use the both of them. I'm sure they're not just going to put Moss in the mothballs as the season moves forward. Detroit 42, Carolina Panthers 24. This is going to be a nightmare year for the Panthers, and guess what? I would say they need Caleb Williams, but doesn't matter. They have Bryce Young, so they're going to have to figure it out. The Lions on their way to, I think, winning the NFC North here. Dolphins 31, Giants 16, Tua 308 through the air. Achane, we talked about him, 151 on the ground, the knee injury as well. That's going to knock him out for at least 4 weeks. Hopefully he's able to come back after that. That's going to take a dimension out of the Miami offense. Tyreek Hill, 181 yards receiving. Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, is the MVP of the league. He is. He's the best. And I've said for years that he was the best player on the Chiefs. And people were like, are you nuts? No, I'm not. He is a difference maker. And I still believe at the end of the day, the Chiefs are going to feel kind of the residual effect of Hill not being there. You'd rather have him than not. And I just think that's going to be a little bit of an issue trying to deal with, not having a guy like that in your receiving room in the long run. But with Miami, he's been just dynamic. They've got to keep him on the field because if he's on the field along with Tua, they're going to be tough to beat, man. That's going to be, again, 11, 12, 13 win team. Saints 34, Patriots nothing. I said pretty much what I had to say about the Patriots a week ago. It pretty much stands. I don't know what you're going to do with that situation. They have bad skill players. They don't have a great offensive line. Their defense is okay, but it's not good enough to withstand bad offense on the other end of it. So football is a complementary game. They're not playing it right now. So I think look, I think there's a definite scenario here where Bill Belichick and the Patriots are no longer together at the end of the year because this is a multiple year rebuild, and he gave money to players he shouldn't have given money to. That's a big problem. And when you have that go on, you've got to figure out a way to overcome that, and the Patriots have not. And yes, the quarterback has a lot to do with it. Mac Jones is not that guy, but if you're going to have a team the way that Bill Belichick has a team with limited skill guys, you can't put a limited quarterback who can't do anything around it. That's where he went wrong. You can get away with that with Tom Brady most of the time. But you can't get away with it when Mac Jones is your quarterback. And that's, to me, that's where the Patriots went sideways. Steelers 17, Ravens 10. We talked about that game already. Too many drop passes by the Ravens in key spots. 7 drops in that game for Baltimore, and that cost them the contest. Lamar Jackson, 236. George Pickens, 130 through the air. Best game of the year for him so far in a meaningful spot. Bengals 34, Arizona 20. Joe Burrow, 317 through the air. But how about Jamar Chase? 15 catches, 192 yards, and count them, 3 touchdowns in the win. Much needed win for the Bengals. The Eagles, 23-14 win over the Rams. I watched pretty much this whole game. The Eagles did not do a good job of covering Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in the beginning of this game. They were terrible at it. And then in the second half, because in part the Eagles' offense was able to stay on the field a lot, that helped. And then Sean Desai, the defensive coordinator of the Eagles, really made some adjustments, got after it a little bit more actively, pressuring the football and pressuring Matthew Stafford, and that changed the luck of the Eagles. So good job adjusting by the Eagles defense, and they get the 9-point win as a result. Jalen Hurts, 303 yards passing. He also led the team in rushing with 72 yards. I don't like that at all. That's got to stop. Well, it's just starting, but it has to stop. He can't be the leading ball carrier, folks. Ticking time bomb. And then A.J. Brown, 127 yards receiving. That's the Eagles' best play. The Eagles' best play. Forget about the tush push. I don't really care about that. I mean, it is what it is. It's probably going to get outlawed at some point in some capacity. They're just going to say you can't push the guy into the pile. in a quarterback sneak scenario, they'll probably call it unsportsmanlike conduct or something. But the best Eagles play is a throw to A.J. Brown. That's it. That's their best play. Nothing else. That's their best play. Simple. If you can't stop that, good luck. Jets 31, Broncos 21 in the Nathaniel Hackett Bowl. The Jets get their measure of revenge. Russell Wilson throws for 199 yards, but Breece Hall, the big star of the day, 177 on the ground for the Jets. Kansas City Chiefs, 27-20 win over the Vikings. Some dubious penalties go in favor of the Chiefs, but they get the 7-point win. Travis Kelce bounced back from an injury, and now as we know, as we record this, that he was able to return in the game and not miss any time. He was able to come back and play for the Chiefs in week number 6, and the Chiefs get the 7-point win over the reeling Vikings, who now will miss Justin Jefferson for at least 4 weeks as he goes on IR. 49ers and Cowboys, 42-10. I already talked about the 49ers. I'd say this for the Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys just have to focus on, playing good football, and they're not. The offense has been really middle of the road, in part because they've been in some blowouts, and they really haven't had to press themselves offensively, but they've got to figure something out offensively because this is not good for them. They've got, much like the Eagles, a hard run coming up, and they've got to be ready for it because if they're not, they're going to be scuffling to make the playoffs, and that's something, Jerry Jones will not respond well to that. And then Raiders 17, Packers 13. Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care? That's my summary of that game. Jimmy Garoppolo, 208 yards. A nothing burger between the Packers and the Raiders. And that will do it for our look at Week 5. Week 6, really the standout game for me is Monday night. Cowboys and Chargers, two teams that are very polarizing because of their coaching, because of their star players. I think that's going to be a fun game on Monday night. Otherwise, the slate, not so great. 49ers, Browns had some sizzle to it, but Deshaun Watson looks like he's not going to play, so that takes it away. Seahawks, Bengals is probably the best 1 o'clock game that's out there. We'll see how that kind of develops. Going to be, I think, a very interesting game here if Cincinnati cannot beat the Seahawks, because that's, again, the Bengals cannot keep falling behind the 8 ball here in the AFC. They've got to be able to kind of tread water here until the second half of the season kicks in, and then maybe at that time they can make a run. And then, of course, the 4 o'clock games. Jets-Eagles is a national game on Fox. Probably the best 4 o'clock game is Lions-Bucks. Yeah, not a great Week 6 slate. Kind of whatever. So we'll see how it goes. But hey, we'll be here to talk about it coming up next week as a part of the JMRA Football Podcast. That'll do it. Check us out on social media. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Joe Montana's Right Arm. Hit us up on the blog at joemontanasrightarm.com. Until next time, happy football, everybody. See ya.